Hey, Changemaker! Welcome to Learning for Good, the only podcast that teaches nonprofit leaders how to leverage training to drive performance, improve capacity, and fuel their mission impact. Do you ever feel like your nonprofit is growing, but your people just aren't keeping up? Or like you're fixing the same problems over and over? Do you wonder how to build confident, capable staff who know how to lead, not just execute? If we haven't met yet, I'm Heather, and I know how hard it can feel to get people to do what's expected of them. Trust me, I have 3 kids. I've tried telling people what to do and how. I've tried the traditional training approaches, and I realized that just doesn't work. And that's when I started researching what does work. Now, I help mission-driven leaders use learning to drive performance, build capacity, and make change that lasts. And I'm sharing it all on this podcast. So block your calendar, turn off your Teams or Slack chat, and let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. I've been in learning and development for around 20 years, and I really don't remember a time when we weren't talking about becoming strategic partners and getting a seat at the table. As an in-house learning and development professional, and now as a nonprofit learning and development consultant, I've experienced the order taker mentality, and I've experienced being the strategic partner. I've spent time speaking and writing about building strategic partnerships, and I've spent time speaking and writing about shifting our approach and our mindset. And today I'm excited to dive back into this conversation with nonprofit learning and development leader Mark Nilles. And here's why. I can tell you what I've experienced, but that's one person's experience. If we really want to move the needle, we need to learn from each other. What's worked, what hasn't worked. We have to learn from each other to build these partnerships with our stakeholders. So I'm excited to dive in today and hear Mark's experience and see what we can learn from him. Let's dive in. It's Learning for Good. Mark Nilles is a learning professional with a non-traditional learning and development background. His work has focused on developing evidence-based teaching and learning approaches for improved workplace performance. His perspective is informed through years of training and capacity building for international development and humanitarian relief professionals around the world. Mark has supported youth employability programs in Palestine and Pakistan, life skills programs in Kyrgyzstan and St. Lucia, Peace Corps volunteers in Ukraine and Mongolia, and USAID staff in DC and around the world. He has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree in international education from Florida State University. Mark, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Heather. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. I think I can share all day long what I have seen or what I've experienced, but until we start having these open conversations about what does this actually look like, what is it not, we really aren't going to move the needle. And so I'm excited to hear your perspective. And you have a lot of deep experience in global organizations. And so that in and of itself might bring a whole different perspective to the conversation. And so really excited to do this with you. Before we jump in, I always like to hear in your own words. It's one thing to read a bio. It's another thing to hear your experience and how you got where you are. So talk us through your career. How did you get where you are today?
So, at the risk of demonstrating too much hubris, let's look at this as the movie, the origin story of Mark Nilles, the L&D professional. So, that movie might open with a scene from when I was 21 years old, one of my first jobs out of college. I was just trying to make some money working in the restaurant industry. So, I got a job as a server at a small, great, fantastic, family-owned sports bar. But I quickly realized that there was so this is back in the day when you would literally write out a customer's order, but there was no standard system for doing that. So Heather, if you and I were both working at that restaurant, you might write down an order for a hamburger with Swiss cheese and French fries one way, and I might write it a different way, which, as you can imagine, caused confusion and frustration between the kitchen staff who would make orders incorrectly or not understand what they were supposed to make. Anyhow, I didn't have any language around learning and development or performance support, but I knew there was a problem. I knew there was an issue that I could help address. So I asked management, hey, can I help us develop a standard system for writing these tickets? Long story short, they said yes. I implemented the system. I then end up going on to develop an onboarding program. Again, I didn't have that language, but I just knew, like, as new staff join, they need to understand how we do things here. So I quickly got into management and worked in restaurants for 5 years. And that was not only my unbeknownst introduction to learning and development, but it was also a lot to do with customer service and just dealing with people. And so I think it's really informed my career. So anyway, that's the first scene of our movie. Second scene, we're going to jump forward about 10 years with a few little highlights in between that time of me serving as a Peace Corps volunteer, which was formative for me, going to graduate school. But really, the scene starts with me working in international development, as you mentioned I did. I was doing a lot of program management, but what I started doing, which really lit a fire under me, was supporting training, or what we might call capacity building or capacity strengthening. So yes, I was doing a lot of budget management. I was doing compliance oversight. I was doing project management. Were all important, but the thing that really got me going was the training and sort of teaching and learning dynamic that I was able to support. And so I started thinking, gosh, if I can do a little bit more of this, that'd be really fun. Then we fast forward, our next formative scene of the movie is Mark Nilles entering his first training of trainers opportunity, a 3-day training of trainers where for the first time I started really learning the art and the science of training design, of training delivery, of engaging participants, of being an effective facilitator. And gosh, that really excited me. And so that really launched my career in learning and development. And for the past 15 plus years, I have continued to explore that teaching and learning dynamic, continue to understand good design practices, evaluation, using feedback to inform better learning, better training, using evidence-based approaches to really push the boundaries of what we can do to help our learners and to understand how to support them in their work. Throughout that process, of course, read a lot of great books, listened to a lot of great podcasts, but also been in community. And to your point earlier about really learning and sharing from each other, I think those have been some of the most important opportunities for me. So being connected with professionals in networks such as your nonprofit L&D collective have been really valuable. So anyway, that's sort of my origin story of Mark Nilles, the learning and development professional.
I love that. And thank you for the shout out for the collective. What I see as you're talking is I see this commitment to more strategic thinking, even from the very beginning. And it's been easy to see a problem and say, let me fix it for myself, or let me fix it for a couple of friends. But to see an opportunity to fix it for an entire restaurant, entire company, and then to continue to go down that path of, okay, but we also need onboarding. We also need this. We also need that. You're starting to even early on think about things from not just a problem solution level, but a more strategic, like, how do we actually approach this in a different way? And then you've been able to continue that as you've gone throughout your career and you've gotten more experience and more insights and learning design. And so, yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. So as we jump in, what does being a strategic partner mean to you? What does it look like? What does it sound like? We all talk about it, but do we even have the same picture of what we're saying? So what does it mean to you?
So being a strategic partner, especially in L&D, means bringing complementary skills. So as a learning and development professional, I know certain things about learning design, development, delivery, evaluation that when it comes to improving performance within an organization is a fantastic complement to the technical expertise that subject matter experts and other stakeholders bring. So really, as long as we're all within working in harmony, is one way to think about it, toward common goals and bringing each other's expertise in a complementary way, that is part of being a strategic partner. As I was preparing for this conversation, I was also thinking about just elements or dimensions of strategic partnership and the risk of forcing a mnemonic. I did come up with 3 C's of strategic partnership. So I'll just run through those quickly. The first C is the cognitive dimension. The second C is the communication dimension. And finally, the consulting dimension. So the cognitive dimension, that piece, is really about having the big picture of what the organization needs, along with the smaller details of how to move that forward from a learning and development perspective. So you're thinking big, you're acting small, and that is cognitively demanding. It's sort of a lot to keep track of. Also with an L&D, as I've already mentioned, is a lot of expertise around cognitive science, around adult learning, around engagement, around evaluation, instructional design, all of these pieces that are really important to know and understand and do well. And so that all being a strategic partner means always being curious, always learning, always exploring, which for those of us who love learning and development is a pretty easy thing for us to do for ourselves as well. Hopefully it's easy. It's compelling, if nothing else. So that's that cognitive piece. Then I mentioned the communication piece. And this is really about communicating your point of view clearly and confidently, which oftentimes you ask, what does that look like? It looks like a concise but convincing argument or perspective that you're sharing, again, with your subject matter experts who don't necessarily have that same expertise that you bring. You might also see, and just sort of more tactically when you're talking about communication, things like basics. I know we've all heard about this, but active listening. So things like paraphrasing, right? So you're sort of helping the person who you're having the conversation with, help them understand how you heard them and how they can either further build on that or clarify or correct what you've discussed. So oftentimes paraphrasing leads to more conversation. Asking good questions and really being strategic about that. So really having that big picture in mind as you're asking really good questions. And then one that's maybe a little bit more, I don't know, more controversial, but can be really effective if it's authentic and if it's natural, is mirroring. So this is sort of that empathy of matching. It might be body language, it might be tone, but these things that really help you and your listeners kind of get on the same wavelength. Okay. So that's the communication piece. And then finally, I mentioned the consulting piece. And this is a culmination really of both the cognitive piece, sort of knowing what you're doing, and the communication piece where you're also adding that dimension of consulting where you understand the needs, priorities, perspectives of your client, and you're helping them reach that goal, again, together in harmony, which sometimes means you need to push back. Not always, but sometimes being that order taker, that's not going to help everybody reach that end line that is so important for them as an individual and for the organization. So being a strategic leader brings all these things together in a way that's not aggressive, but also not deferential. And it's about another thing that I really feel strongly about is just being prepared for the conversation, being prepared for the interaction. And that also, again, builds your confidence, builds your clarity, and helps you be that consultative partner that is really important for this role.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have often joked that my job is to ask questions because so much of what we do is trying to understand what the other person needs, what they want, what they're not saying, what the problem, what the pain points are, would actually motivate someone to do something. So much of it is just understanding other people. And a lot of that comes down to questions. So I love that you called that out. I'm curious, do you feel like strategic partnership, as you describe it, as you define it, is that reserved for people within certain roles or positions, or can anyone lead from a strategic partner point of view?
I would like to think anyone could lead with that strategic viewpoint. As we go in the conversation, we might identify some reasons why it's maybe a bit more challenging for some folks than others. And I'll get into a little bit about how we might address that. But yeah, ideally, everyone has those opportunities to demonstrate their expertise, to make arguments or make suggestions in a convincing way. And again, bottom line, with the best interest of the organization in mind.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think we like to think we can control other people, but we cannot. But we can control ourselves. We can lead ourselves. And so if you think about the dimensions specifically that you called out, the cognitive dimension, the communication dimension, the consulting dimension, we are empowered for ourselves to do those things. So can you share an example? I really want to make sure we're bringing this to life for people. Can you share an example of a time when you moved from order taker to someone who had influence over a business decision or a project, an initiative, an organizational outcome, something like that?
Absolutely. So to do this, I've got a couple of examples in mind, but I think we'll focus on one. And unfortunately, I need to take us back about 5 years when we were sort of in that pandemic, the early days of the pandemic, right? So the organization that I was working with, our client, had been doing all in-person trainings up until then. They were heavily reliant on in-person trainings and they were working well. Their core course was they called it a foundations course. It was a 3-day in-person course that really touched on what every unit in the organization did, talking about basic concepts, basic terminology, frameworks, that sort of thing, to get new hires or people who were in new roles acclimated to what the organization did and how they did it. But again, at the foundational level, they offer this course before COVID, twice a year, to up to 25 people in Washington, D.C. Then the world shut down, or at least in-person gatherings shut down. We were able to, as a team, as a learning and development team, we were able to convert a lot of the trainings to virtual delivery, and we had a lot of success with that. This foundations course, though, it was a little trickier. I'll get into why it was trickier in just a moment, but we didn't immediately convert that one. At the same time, this organization was going through actually pretty significant growth during the years of COVID. So they had new people in new roles without the benefit of this foundations course, this course that helped people navigate really sort of the organization, understand a lot of the basics. So there was this growing demand for this training, and it wasn't being delivered. And we had so much success with virtual delivery of other trainings that leadership came to us and said, convert this foundations course as well. So at that point, I had a choice. I could be the order taker and say, yes, we will do that. Or I could look at it more critically and think about whether that was the right thing to do. And right away, I pretty much knew it wasn't the right thing to do for a few reasons. First of all, the in-person delivery, because it represented all of the different units, had trainers coming and going throughout. So it was this logistical challenge of getting up to 15 or so different trainers in the room, and converting them all to conduct this virtually would have been very, very, not impossible, but very difficult. Secondly, the content, as I mentioned, was fairly basic. It was important, but, and of course it required good explanation, some engagement, and some reflection, but it didn't require sort of that nuanced, in-depth discussion that some higher level content would require through an in-person training. Thirdly, the influx, as I mentioned, they had an influx of staff, and this was a global organization. Again, the previous way to do it was to reach about 25 people per delivery. There were dozens of new people who needed this training, and they were scattered around the world. So anything that we would do synchronously would be very limited in reach. At the same time, there was this new tool that is now very familiar to everybody, but new tool called Articulate Rise, which made conversion or a creation of e-learning a lot easier, a lot more accessible to folks. And I was experimenting with the conversion of a webinar to an e-learning module. So I had existing content that I created an e-learning from. And I thought, boy, we have all of this existing content from the in-person training. I think we can convert it. And again, given the content is basic, given that it's terminology and concepts and frameworks, and you can do some engagement within Articulate Rise, you can offer opportunities for reflection. I thought it was a great opportunity. So I used that other e-learning that I had developed from the webinar as a prototype. And I showed that to leadership. And I said, this could be a great solution for this fundamentals course. At the same time, I made 3 promises that I thought addressed some of their concerns. One, they were very busy. This was a very busy time for them. And I promised them this would not require a significant amount of time from their staff. We're not talking about developing a new training. We're talking about converting content from one form to another. Yes, we would need their input, but not significant. 2, we were going to develop 9 e-learning modules. I promised them we could do that all in 1 year. And we could have it done and ready fairly quickly. And in terms of development, that's a fairly quick turnaround. The third promise, and probably the most important one, was that all staff, all new hires, all existing staff would have immediate access to this content on their own schedule. No matter where they were in the world, no matter what time zone they were in, no matter what day of the week it was, they could access this material, they could get the benefit from it. Bottom line, they said yes. We met all of those promised deliverables. Within the first year, more than 200 staff had accessed the e-learning. So again, if we had done this as a sort of instructor-led, we might have reached 50 people that first year. We got 200 folks to engage in the first year, all based on this ability to demonstrate as a strategic partner that there was another solution that could be cheaper and more effective with greater reach.
Do you wish you could connect with other nonprofit learning and development leaders? I know what it feels like to want someone to bounce ideas off of and to learn from, someone who really understands you and your work. Imagine if you could have a simple way to meet people in the field, ask questions, and share information. That's why I created the Nonprofit Learning and Development Collective, where nonprofit L&D, talent management, and DEI leaders can connect with each other quickly and easily in a virtual space. When you join this community, you will walk away with a new, diverse, and powerful network and a sounding board for your staff development needs. So if you're ready to exchange ideas and collaborate with your peers, come join the Nonprofit L&D Collective.
Yeah, that's such a great example to kind of think through, because it is often, I feel like, I don't know, in my experience with stakeholders, there are times, there are idea theories, which is not always a bad thing, but it's like, oh, we can just do this. And from their perspective, where they sit, that's the quickest, that's the easiest, that's the most viable option. But as learning designers, we have different perspectives because we have different experiences, we have different expertise. And so we're able to say, well, you could do that. And here are the potential risks or challenges with doing that. To your point, reaching that many people synchronously, virtually, when they're around the world would be difficult. So here are the kind of the challenges or risks you would face with that. Or here are these other options. Here are these other ways that we can potentially meet those same needs that have fewer risks, fewer challenges, whatever the case is. And so your approach really was looking at what is the need? How can we meet that need? Is what you're suggesting the best way to meet that need? And then having those conversations, again, pulling on your dimensions there of cognitive communication and consulting, and being able to have those conversations and say, what about this? Let's take a look and see if this might be a good option for us.
Indeed. Yeah. As you're saying that, I recall a phrase that fits here in terms of when a subject matter expert says, I want a training. The question becomes, well, do you know what you like, or do you like what you know? And it's the familiar oftentimes that, as you say, like they're coming back to this familiar solution when maybe it's the right thing, but maybe we should explore something else.
Absolutely. Did you, as you presented this back to whoever your stakeholders were at the time, was it pretty immediate, let's do it, let's try it? Or was there hesitation? What did that kind of conversation look like for you?
There wasn't deliberate pushback, but the organization was going through some leadership and other changes that just meant a decision couldn't be made. Leadership, there was outgoing leadership that didn't feel like they wanted to commit to this. New leadership came in, it had to be presented to them. But once we got in front of the right people and they felt like they had the authority, then it was a pretty quick yes, and we got the green light. I remember exactly the moment when I learned that we had this approved. And my first thought was, what have I gotten myself into? This is a really ambitious project. But then very quickly, I knew this is the right thing to do, and I know we can do it. And we did.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you have the data to kind of back up that your approach was more efficient for reaching people. So that's really cool. So when we think about strategic partnership and what it means, what it looks like, how do we move from order taker to strategic partner, all of those things that we've been talking about, why do you think that's such an important conversation for us to have in L&D?
For L&D in particular, and this circles back to something we were just talking about, training, in a way, is very familiar to all of our stakeholders. They've been through school, they've been to professional development workshops, they've been to conference sessions, they've been to lunch and learns. They know what this might look like. And if it's done well, oftentimes it looks like it's fairly easy. It all flows. It's all logical. The speaker, the facilitator always knows what to say and do. And so let's just do that. And so if we're being order takers, we're basically responding to sort of this inclination to sort of do, again, what's familiar, doing what I already know, when in fact, we bring L&D, we bring expertise that allows us to identify needs, identify solutions, really think about those broader performance goals that we know need to be reached, and think about when training could be an option, when training is one part of a solution, but not the whole solution, all of those things. So I think there's this scrap of familiarity where people think like, I've seen this done for years, so let's just do that thing. And by the way, I probably already know how to do it. So I don't really need a lot of support. I just need you to help me, book a room and take attendance. And maybe if you could set up some flip charts, and then I'll lecture for my 8 hours or whatever they have in mind. They don't quite understand that all the engagement and design and everything that goes into it is really important. And skipping those steps is, in my mind, a non-negotiable. You really cannot skip the important steps.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've rarely worked with a stakeholder who has not at some point in their career created a training, quote unquote training. And so it feels like something easy, familiar. I once had a stakeholder tell me that I needed to just watch her train and write down everything she said to create the training. And it's like, I mean, I could do that, but that's not necessarily going to give you the best result. So I do think having that shift, we know things because of our background, because of our experiences, because of trial and error, because of learning on our own, because of formal education in some cases. We know things about learning and development that other people don't know, even if they've created training before. And so it's important to be able to share those perspectives and have those conversations.
And important to remember, nobody has bad intentions. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. But the bad intention is when we're shut out or we're given a diminished role in the process.
That's a great point. So again, I feel like we've been talking about this for as long as I have been in learning and development, this shift to strategic partner, we can't be an order taker. We're not just, producing widgets. Like we have to be more strategic. So what do you think keeps people stuck in this order taker role? And how do we move out of that? What is that mistake that people are making over and over again that keeps us stuck where we are?
Yeah. So I have been a big fan for a while and applying it more and more of the COM-B framework, the COM-B model. This is a model that talks about behavior and behavior change. And so I'll just give a quick overview for those who need a refresher or unfamiliar. So COM-B, the B stands for behavior. In this case, we're talking about the actions people take, not good or bad behavior, but things that people do. So in this case, the behavior is acting like an order taker versus a strategic partner. That's the behavior that we want to see. The C, O, and M, those are all also, that's an acronym. So C stands for capability, O stands for opportunity, M stands for motivation. So within each of those, capability, that's really when you're asking the question, can they do it? Do they have the knowledge, the skills, the confidence to do the thing? Opportunity, that's when we're wondering whether the system is set up to support the behavior. So this could be organizational policies, could be contractual expectations, could be leadership priorities, a system around them. Motivation asks the question, do they want to do it even when there's resistance? So does it really matter for people to be a strategic leader versus an order taker? Is there benefit in it for them to take that extra step? So to quickly consider sort of this within the context of this problem that we're talking about or this issue that we're talking about. So capability. If there's a capability gap, the person involved just might simply not know enough about learning science or instructional design to feel confident. So earlier when you were asking, can anybody play this role? Yes, but I could see where someone a little bit newer to the field, a little bit younger, feeling like they're maybe at a different level of hierarchy, depending on what kind of hierarchy is in an organization, they might have a capability gap. There might be a real reason based on their capability, not to say that they're not capable people. Maybe they need some more time to build some more knowledge, skills, and confidence. At the end of the day, you can't advocate for an approach that you can't articulate. So to support this, you might think about providing training or other learning support. Maybe there's job aids that can help people become more strategic partners. probably even better yet, practice sessions. Have them practice playing this role out with somebody who's playing the role of a stakeholder or a client to really build that capability. So that's capability. Opportunity, we're starting to get pretty tricky because we're talking about their environment, the conditions, the systems that they're working in. So I used to work on a program where we had contractual deliverables. We had committed to delivering X number of trainings a year. If we didn't meet that number of trainings developed and delivered, then we weren't meeting our contractual deliverables. So that forced our hand sometimes to have to create training, even maybe if it wasn't the right solution. Maybe your LMS only supports a certain way of delivering training, and you'd love to do something different, but really you're stuck within that system. Maybe people with authority have made a commitment that you are asked to fulfill, and you don't necessarily have the ability to go against that. So all that is to say that sometimes people aren't order takers at all by choice, it's by structure. So it gets pretty tricky here, but we're talking about needing to change the conditions rather than change the person. You can do everything you want to help build that person's capacity, but if the conditions around them haven't changed, then it's going to be really hard for them to be that strategic partner. Then we can move into motivation quickly. This might even be the trickiest because it can look like somebody's being lazy. Might look like somebody's going along to get along, but it's really very rarely is it that simple. Sometimes people are going along just because it's safer. They don't want to stick their neck out. Maybe they have built strong relationships with people, and that keeping that relationship is more important than thinking about a broader outcome that you might get if you do push back and call for a different solution. Maybe they just don't see the cost of or the risks of going along with the training solution. So anyway, to address the motivation, people need to feel like they have agency or control. They have to feel like, oh, I can step into this position and push back. They need to understand the importance of exploring other options. It's really important to do this. So they need to feel connected to other goals. So bottom line, there's various ways to address this and there's various reasons behind it. And I really, when I think about this issue, I don't judge people for being order takers because usually they're responding in a rational way to the environment they're in. So if we do step back, though, and think about, can we help them? Can we support them to being more strategic through increasing their capacity? Is there something about the environment that we could change, even though that can be difficult? Or are there incentives or motivation that we can affect? That oftentimes can help us think about what's getting in the way and how to help them address it.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out about what you just shared is there benefit to someone acting more strategically even when there's resistance? And I think about the number of times I've heard in any organization that conflict is a challenge because people avoid conflict. And so there is many times this need in organizations to have some conflict related support, like we need training or whatever the solution is, but people need to be able to better handle and resolve conflict because so many people just avoid it altogether. And if you think about that being prevalent across a lot of organizations, it makes sense that's also prevalent in people sitting in learning and development roles. And so when you go back to someone and you say, actually, rather than this solution, why don't we consider these solutions? And here's why, that can feel like you're creating conflict. And so, yeah, you just got my brain going a little bit there around like, what does it look like to do that when there might be resistance? And does it feel worth it to someone to potentially create conflict within a relationship that they have to continue working in?
Yeah, 100%. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about the people I've try to have this conversation with and their sort of willingness to go down that road and my confidence to do it in a way that feels helpful and I'm not pointing a finger that what you're suggesting is wrong. Rather, I'm suggesting something based on my expertise. But none of these are easy, unfortunately. There's a few easy fixes here.
Yeah. But then I also think when we ignore that potential conflict, we bottle up our own emotions and then we start to become defensive in those conversations when things aren't going the way we think they should. But
it's a bigger conversation.
either way.
Yeah. My wife works in workplace conflict, so she could give you a whole dissertation on this. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Okay. Well, we're probably not going to solve all workplace conflict in one conversation. So, what are some practical things that people can do, shifts they can make to become one step more proactive, one step more influential, one step more strategic in their organization?
Yeah, so just sort of reflecting back on the COM-B model that I was mentioning and some of the examples, I'll just kind of build on some of those. So one thing is making sure that there's a strong feeling and understanding of why this project matters, what we are achieving. We're not just doing a training, we're implementing an initiative that's going to solve a problem, that's going to, have a real purpose behind it. That can be very motivating. That can be a very vivid North Star for folks to think like this thing is going to really make a difference for the organization and for the people involved. Another thing that might help with motivation, one reframing that we used a lot at my previous organization was to think about the learner as the main audience, not the client. So a phrase that we came back to over and over again was advocate for the learner always. It was a guiding principle, and it really gave us permission to push back gently, but push back when the thing that the client was requesting was really about making their life easier versus making the but would make the learning experience worse. So they were sort of saying, yeah, well, I'd rather do it this way because it's better for them, but not really thinking about the implications on the learner. See, just one other thing that I have in mind and that I sort of mentioned when I was telling the story about the conversion of the fundamentals course to e-learning is start small. Start with a prototype. Start with, you don't have to win like a grand argument on instructional design from day one. You could introduce an engaging experience that will be effective. One thing, one engagement activity. Or you could support the development of slightly better slides. Your subject matter experts are developing slides that are too text heavy. You can make some suggestions in order to help them. And then that helps you step into that strategic partner role, even if it's just one step. Ideally, you would have some evaluation or other feedback data to show you that what you have done is more effective. But really, sometimes you just have to open the door, demonstrate your expertise, demonstrate your value, demonstrate your suggestions can matter. That can open the door to more productive and effective strategic partnerships. And the final thing I'll say, and this gets back to one of the earlier things I said, is finding a community of like-minded professionals, finding your folks who you can commiserate with, but also trust and connect with, and sort of build that confidence, build that understanding with, and learn from each other, just as you were saying at the top of this. So groups like the nonprofit L&D Collective and others out there are really, really valuable opportunities to hopefully overcome this persistent issue.
Absolutely. And it really is about those small steps, like you're saying. Just you're probably not going to make sweeping change overnight. So, what are those small things that you can do every single day, every single interaction that just slowly move you forward into that more strategic role? And doing that consistently over time, one, it builds your strategic muscle, but it also shapes how people perceive you. And so that one step at a time, one little thing at a time, start small and do one little thing at a time is so, so important. Well, Mark, thank you for joining me today and for sharing your experiences and your expertise, your insights on what it means to be a strategic partner, what this can look and how people can step into a more strategic role.
Thank you, Heather. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks. We just have to continue getting one step closer to where we want to be. It's a commitment that we make, it's discipline over time, and it's a willingness to show up in this way even when there is resistance. If you are excited about being a strategic partner, if you have success stories, if you are just stepping into this and trying to figure out what does this look like in my organization and my role, how do I do this? How do I navigate this? No matter where you are on this spectrum, I would love to see you at the Learning for Good Summit in July. we are hosting a virtual, I would call it more of a leadership intensive, but it's a virtual summit, virtual conference. And the whole thing is planned around helping everyone step into this role of strategic partner, of strategic learning leader, no matter what your title is, no matter where you sit, no matter what type of nonprofit you are in. We want to see everyone taking steps toward being more strategic. And this summit is going to be a great way to come together, to learn from each other, to share what's working for you, and to practice and to put together a plan so that you can take one step every single day closer to your vision of being a strategic partner. I'll drop the link to that in the show notes, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.
Hey friend, was this episode helpful for you? Did you like what you heard? Do you want more content like this? Here are 3 things you can do. Hit subscribe. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. Share this episode with a colleague. This means so much to me personally. I read every review, but it also helps me learn what content you like most so I can create more of what you want. All right, turn that Teams or Slack chat back on when you're ready, and I'll see you next time on Learning for Good.